The indigenous people of the Amazon in Brazil are the original inhabitants of the largest and most biodiverse rainforest in the world. They belong to hundreds of different ethnic groups, each with their own language, culture, and way of life. They have a deep connection and respect for the forest, which they depend on for their survival and well-being. They have also faced centuries of oppression, exploitation, and violence from colonizers, settlers, and governments who seek to take over their lands and resources. They are now struggling to defend their rights and their territory from the threats of deforestation, mining, logging, and farming that are destroying the Amazon and its peoples. The indigenous peoples of the Brazilian Amazon are groups that have lived in the rainforest for thousands of years, accumulating a detailed knowledge of the ecosystem and methods for subsisting on it. However, today they have to share the forests with a growing number of settlers looking to exploit the Amazon's considerable natural resources. Under the rule of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon has increased, putting the survival of some of the world's most emerging indigenous communities at risk. Indigenous peoples in the Brazilian Amazon have staged unprecedented protests to block what they describe as a declaration of extermination by lawmakers representing agribusiness, mining, and forest clearing interests under Bolsonaro. The indigenous people of the Amazon are groups that have different languages, cultures, and customs, but that share a deep connection with nature and respect for the spirits. Some of the indigenous people of the Amazon are the Piripkara, the Kawahiva, the Caribos, the Nawa, and the Nukak. They live in a nomadic or semi-nomadic way, hunting, fishing, and collecting fruits and plants from the forest. They use weapons such as bows, arrows, spears, and blowguns to capture animals such as monkeys, tapirs, alligators, and turtles. They also use plants that contain hallucinogens to communicate with the spiritual world and consult the shamans, who are the religious leaders and healers of the communities. The indigenous people of the Amazon have a detailed knowledge of the forest and its resources, which they learned over thousands of years of coexistence with the ecosystem. They know how to identify the species of plants and animals that are useful for food, medicine, construction, and art. They also know how to manage the forest in a sustainable way, without destroying or exhausting its resources. They have a holistic view of nature, in which everything is interconnected and depends on the balance between living beings. The indigenous people of the Amazon face many threats to their survival and their culture, such as the invasion of their lands by loggers, miners, and farmers, who deforest the forest and expel or kill the native people. Some indigenous people of the Amazon are considered the most threatened in the world, such as the Awa, who have about 350 members and 100 of them have no contact with the outside world. Other indigenous people of the Amazon are fighting to defend their rights and their territory, organizing protests, denouncing violations, and seeking support from national and international organizations. The indigenous people of the Amazon have been living in the rainforest for at least 11,200 years, surviving the genocide that began in the 1500s, when Portuguese and Spanish colonizers brought war, enslavement, and new viral diseases that killed millions. The indigenous people of the Amazon are survivors of a long history of oppression and resistance, and they have maintained their diverse languages, cultures, and traditions despite the threats and challenges they face. The indigenous people of the Amazon have a rich and complex relationship with the rainforest, which they consider their home and their source of life. They use the forest resources for food, medicine, shelter, clothing, and art, but they also respect the forest's limits and balance. They practice sustainable management techniques, such as shifting cultivation, agroforestry, and fire prevention, that allow them to coexist with the forest without degrading it too. The indigenous people of the Amazon are not a homogeneous group, but rather a mosaic of different peoples with different histories, identities, and aspirations. Some of them are nomadic hunter-gatherers, others are sedentary farmers, some live in voluntary isolation, others have contact with the outside world. Some of them are the Piripkara, the Kawahiva, the Karubos, the Nawa, and the Nukak 3. They have different forms of social organization, political representation, and spiritual beliefs, but they also share common values and struggles for their rights and their territory. In conclusion, the indigenous people of the Amazon are peoples who have a long and diverse history of living in the rainforest, with a deep knowledge and respect for the ecosystem. They face many threats to their survival and their culture, but they also fight for the defense of their rights and their territory. They are an integral and essential part of the Amazon and the world.